If you are a Canadian looking to invest in US real estate, there are a number of really important things you must consider. If you set things up the wrong way, it can cost you a whole lot of money, but don't let that discourage you because there are a ton of opportunities out there. And in this video, I'm going to break down the 3 things you must consider as a Canadian looking to invest in US real estate. And before we go over the 3 things you must consider, I thought it would be prudent to visit some common challenges that Canadians face when they're looking to acquire property in the United States. And the first challenge is financing. If you're a Canadian looking to invest in US real estate, many US lenders require somebody on title to be an American, not all foreign owned. So that can present a number of challenges depending on if you're going with a local bank or a larger financial institution. You have to take that into account. And if you are having a key principal, if you're doing a larger deal, many times it makes more sense to have a US based, an American KP signing on your loan, guaranteeing the loan, rather than a Canadian. And the reason is a lot of US lenders now have different balance sheet requirements for a Canadian KP. So it just makes way more sense to partner with an American, have them guarantee the loan as the KP, rather than having a Canadian do the same thing. That being said, there are some Canadian institutions that do loan in the US. They have their US arm that can help you out. But generally speaking, this is a challenge that a lot of Canadians encounter. And the second challenge is management, getting the boots on the ground. Because if you are a Canadian and you're shoveling snow off your driveway, chances are you're not going to be walking the property somewhere in Florida or in Texas, Arizona, wherever you're looking to invest. So it's really important to have somebody there on site who's able to visit the properties at a moment's notice, being able to manage the properties, making sure that you're managing the manager, your property manager, all those types of things. And if you're looking to be totally remote, totally passive, it generally doesn't work out so well. So you need solid people, boots on the ground, who can help you manage your growing portfolio. And along the same vein, we have deal flow. If you're not shaking hands, going out, meeting brokers, having lunches and dinners with different lenders, investors, those really important people, it can be really challenging to have deal flow if you're just relying on the internet. Because you have to remember, real estate is a contact sport, a full contact sport. So you have to be able to rub shoulders, meet people. It's one thing to look at listings online, but the real deals happen face to face with real people. So if you are a Canadian looking to invest in US real estate, you will want to invest the time visiting the markets that you're looking at, meeting the people, getting connected with that community, because that's where a whole lot of the deals are going to come from. And this is why syndication is a great option if you are a Canadian. I'll just break down real quick what syndication is, just in case you're not familiar. What a syndication does is it pools investor capital together so then they can participate in a deal that's much larger than one that they could do on their own, and the deal is managed by a professional. Let's say there's 10 to 20 separate investors. They can only do a small deal on their own, and they don't want to go through all the hassles of traveling to different markets, getting deal flow going in a certain market. They don't really want to be involved full time. Well, they can invest the money passively through a syndication, and the syndicator, the sponsor, they've got the track record, they have the deals, they have the experience, they have all of those needed requirements, and then the investor can passively invest, collect the checks, and the syndicator, the sponsor, will manage the deal and do all the heavy lifting. And I have a ton of videos just on syndication because that's our bread and butter on this channel, so definitely check that out if that's something that's of interest to you. But now let's get into the 3 things you must consider if you are a Canadian looking to invest in US real estate. And number 1 is structure. And it all comes down to tax credits and the tax treaty between Canada and the United States. And if you're a Canadian and you've been looking online for a while about how to invest in US real estate, chances are you've come across a whole bunch of articles and content talking about how amazing the LLC structure is. Well, it is amazing if you're American. But you have to remember 99% of content out there about US real estate investing is geared towards Americans. What those authors and content creators don't understand is the role that CRA plays. And if you're an American, CRA is basically the Canadian IRS. And you have to understand that CRA does not recognize the LLC structure. So as a Canadian, if you set up your entity as an LLC in the United States, and now it's time to file your Canadian taxes, well, you're not going to get credit for all the tax you paid in the US because CRA does not play well with LLCs. And I have to be honest, we get messages every single week from people who invested through an LLC, and they're saying, hey, Seth, can you help me out? I realize I'm in trouble. Well, guess what? You're already in the pit. So the way you get around that is structure things the right way from the get-go. So you have to find a very experienced cross-border accountant who understands sophisticated real estate investing, and they will help you structure the right way, which is through a limited partnership, not an LLC. And along that vein is number 2, which is personal structuring. Are you going to own the investment in your personal name? Are you going to set up an entity on the US side of the border? Do you have a Canadian entity that will then plug in to the US entity? Are you going to use blocker corps to protect your investment? There are all sorts of considerations that go into things on the personal side, not only just the real estate asset structuring side. And the right way for you is going to depend on a number of different factors, which is why, again, you need a solid cross-border accountant who understands how this stuff works so they can give you tailored, specific advice for your specific situation. And the third most important thing for you to consider as a Canadian investing in US real estate is repatriation. And if you're not sure what that means, it's basically how do you move the money from the US across the border back into Canada in the most tax efficient way so you're not paying more tax than you have to. And there's so many things to consider here. Are you planning on keeping most of your money in the US, in a US entity? Well, in that case, if that's happening, well, what are your requirements for reporting your income in Canada? Because depending on a couple of different things, you'll have to pay tax anyway. So you have to understand how repatriation works so you can develop the most tax efficient strategy for you. Or are you planning on taking every dollar earned? Are you going to repatriate that across the border right away? If that's the case, depending on how you're investing, there's a holdback tax to make sure Uncle Sam gets the tax that they're owed. There's all sorts of things. So this can get really complicated. I'm giving you the 3 main things to consider, but the number 1 message I want to get out to you right now is you need to work with a professional cross-border accountant who understands this stuff. It's not good enough to talk with the accountant after you've already done something. Talk to them well in advance. Because I'll tell you, whenever we have an investor interested in investing with us and all the apartment buildings we acquire, the first thing we do is direct them to a solid, reputable cross-border accountant, because they have to have that discussion first, figure out how they're going to play the game, and then they can come back to us and have a very educated discussion, and then we can talk about investment opportunities and how we can best take their money and deploy it in a value-add strategy in an apartment building, which is what we do. So if you are a Canadian considering investing in US real estate, number 1, you have to figure out structure for the deal itself. Remember, CRA does not play well with LLCs. Number 2, your personal structure. How are you going to set yourself up? Are you going to try and avoid holdback tax by having a US entity get paid from the property entity and then repatriate from there? Do you have a Canadian US entity, all that kind of stuff? And number 3, repatriation. What's the most efficient way for you to move that money from the US back to Canada so you're not paying more tax than you have to? And I mentioned syndication, and it's a great structure to passively invest in multifamily real estate in apartment buildings. And if you're somebody who's interested in using the syndication structure and taking advantage of the tax benefits, the strong cash flow, the stability, the appreciation, and the scale that apartment buildings provide, check out this video right here where I break down how syndications work, the pros and cons, and everything you need to know.